Thank you. And Boker Tov, or, the proper greeting, depending on whatever time zone you're in. Um, so I'm really grateful to my Jewish Learning for the opportunity to teach this morning and to offer some Torah thoughts because it's my father's English yahrzeit tomorrow. So I want to offer these words in honor of my father's memory, Zichrono Livracha, Gary Anderson. He died very young at 65 and was a big proponent of education, especially my education. So he would be very proud of my teaching. And I'm also thinking very much about Dante Wright, who lost his life, was killed this week, and Adam Toledo, who was a 13-year-old boy who lost his life, was killed this week. And, watching some of my favorite shows and seeing this, one adorable Asian character, or he's an adorable boy who's Asian, and he does these PSAs during the commercial breaks about Asian hate. And also the details of George Floyd's very public murder are being rehashed on every public outlet this week. So it's been a very difficult week for me personally. I've felt a cloud of, not a cloud, I was going to say a cloud of depression, but clouds are fluffy and light. It's more like a weighted blanket of depression. And it's just settled on me, just with all of this hate and injustice. Can I make this about Torah and not politics? That's a great comment, because our Torah, God bless it, is a political document. And I highly recommend, if you are interested in understanding how our Torah is deeply seminal and political, to read Who Wrote the Torah, Who Wrote the Bible by Richard Elliott Friedman. Really examines how the Torah is a political document and how that shapes who we are as Jews. So, thank you, Julie. So this Torah is coming from that place, because as much as we want to pretend that we can separate Torah and politics, the Torah is whatever it is. And we consistently give it meaning based on the eyes through which we are viewing said Torah, right? We have Torah commentary that comes to us through men, right, who are experiencing the world as men. Torah commentary that comes to us through women who are experiencing the world as women. Torah commentary that comes to us through African Americans, through Asian Americans, through African Canadians, through Asian Brazilians, right? This is how our Torah works, especially as we're moving now towards Shavuot, to understand the meaning and the beauty of the 70 faces of Torah, how we turn and understand it. So I'm so honored to be able to share all of this with you this morning. So let's jump in. Let's make a blessing as we immerse ourselves in the Torah of this moment. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. O Holy One of blessing, whose presence fills creation, you have created holiness and given us a taste of holiness and a charge of holiness, and asked us to be holy by engaging in words of Torah, matters of Torah. drawing conclusions and correlations between Torah and the lived experiences that we have right now. May these words of Torah that will be before our eyes ever be sweet to us. May they attract us, and may they may they be seeds. As we learn this week's Torah portion, Tazria-Metzora, the root of seeds. May they be seeds to plant in our souls and erupt, as we talk about eruptions this week, into our beings, into our actions, and may we use them to bring our lives into alignment with that which you are designing for us, O Holy One of Blessing. And may we share these teachings through our actions and through our words with our children, our children's children, our nieces and nephews, our students, the male person, anyone that we encounter with whom we can interact. Let us always interact from a place of deep Torah. And may we continue to be zoche, to be meritorious of having the ability to study Torah Lishma, to study and understand this guidance that you've offered us, just because we have a deep love of it, a love of Judaism, and a love of getting closer to you, O Holy One of Blessing. Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. Blessed are you who teaches Torah to the people Israel, those who struggle with you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here we are. Share screen. All right. So we are in Parshat Tazria-Metzora, one of my favorite parshiot of the Torah. And you might think, oh my God, who loves Tazria-Metzora? Who likes talking about emissions and all of this stuff? But our Torah is amazing. There's always so many secrets, so many hidden levels. Until when do we have, Julie, until 11?
11:15.
Okay, let me write that at the top, because as you know, rabbis, we can just go on and on and on. Ein dorshei haka Yisrael, right? Like no one opens it up like we do. Okay, so Tazria-Metzora deals with Tzara'at, and Tzara'at is a series of eruptions, and I really like the word eruptions. Usually we'll talk about emissions, but they're different. They have a different feel, I think. Emissions are simply a release, right? We have carbon dioxide emissions from the trees, or carbon monoxide emissions from our cars, and they feel gentle and almost, you can ignore them. They're just sort of happening, whereas eruptions happen with force, right? Can you imagine if you were standing somewhere and you witnessed a volcanic emission? It's like, oh, that's really nice. There's some air coming out, some gases, it's lovely. Versus standing somewhere and witnessing a volcanic eruption, right? You'd probably, God willing, want to be very far away from the eruption. So we're going to use the word eruptions and think about what that is. So Tazria begins with a woman in childbirth and the length of ritual impurity and how one remediates that ritual impurity afterwards. I'm going to try to move you right here so I don't have to look at the other side of my screen. Okay. And I really enjoy this because I enjoy this part because when I, had my daughter, they warned me, like, she might be born menstruating because of all the hormones that were in my body. They were carried over into her body. And in fact, that's what happened. She was born menstruating. And I saw that and I thought, oh, is that why women are considered impure for 2 weeks as opposed to 1 week when they birth a female child over a male child? That makes sense now. As much as it can make sense. Like I had an understanding of that. So I appreciated being brought into that piece of knowledge. Then it continues on to discuss males with seminal eruptions, right? Literally putting out the seeds, the semen. And then we move on to this Tzara'at, these surface eruptions. And tzara'at is often mistranslated as leprosy because there is no other word for tzara'at in our English language. But leprosy is a bacterial infection, right? It doesn't get spread by touch to the best of my knowledge. It just looks really bad. But it's a great metaphor for what Tazria-Metzora, for what tzara'at is doing, right? There's something invisible. In the case of leprosy, it's bacteria, churning and operating beneath the surface. And we only know that it's there when there's an eruption, right? And only when there's an eruption can we acknowledge that there is something there under the surface. Can we see it first? Then we can acknowledge it, then we can name it, and then we can remediate it in some way. We can do something about it. So Metzora starts to talk about it's on our skin. The tzara'at appears on our skin. The tzara'at appears on our hair, in our scalps. And then it goes on in here about how it appears on our homes and in our clothes. And so we discover that it's not like we thought, right? It's not leprosy in the way that we thought, because leprosy doesn't show up on our walls, right? We don't get leprosy on our clothes. So what are we dealing with here? So let's look at the text. Leviticus 14:34 through 45. It's a long chunk. When you enter the land of Canaan that I give you as a possession, and I inflict an eruptive plague upon a house in the land you possess, the owner of the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, something like a plague has appeared upon my house. The priest shall order the house cleared before the priest enters to examine the plague, so that nothing in the house may become unclean. After that, the priest shall enter to examine the house. If, when he examines the plague in the walls of the house is found to consist of greenish or reddish streaks that appear to go deep into the wall, the priest shall come out of the house to the entrance of the house and close up the house for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall return. If he sees that the plague has spread on the walls of the house, the priest shall order the stones with the plague in them to be pulled out and cast outside of the city into an unclean place. The house shall be scraped inside all around, and the coating that is scraped off shall be dumped outside the city in an unclean place. They shall take other stones and replace those stones with them, and take other coating and plaster the house. If the plague again breaks out into the house, after the stones have been pulled out and after the house has been scraped and replastered, the priest shall come to examine. If the plague has spread in the house, it is a malignant eruption in the house. It is unclean. The house shall be torn down, its stones and timber and all the coating on the house, and taken to an unclean place outside of the city. Whew. So my first thought is, God, you definitely don't want tzara'at to pop out in your house. It's like, it's not just calling the mold person, right? It's like, it could get very bad, although, mold also gets very bad. The priest is trying to figure out what is going on and trying to understand the depths, how serious this case of tzara'at is. So what do we do? Before we get to the what do we do, I'm going to scroll down to think about how we understand our treatment of tzara'at, the what do we do of it, and how we understand even what it is. So Rashbam, who's Rashi's grandson, writing in the 11th, 12th centuries in France, writes, none of the verse in the chapters following, meaning, all what we're talking about, may be interpreted in the way it sounds when read superficially, as the phenomena described do not correspond to any skin diseases we are familiar with. Okay, This is Rashbam talking already in the 12th century, yet we still persist in calling it leprosy, right? Something that we know, because that's what we do. That's what we have to fit things into what we know. So, and we can't talk about it using regular terms, regular medical knowledge. As he says, we are, and are not subject to medical treatment, right? This is something totally different. What applies to the human skin applies in the same degree to stains on clothing, which are described as well as to manifestations of mildew or something similar breaking forth from the walls of the house, right? Like, we don't have something that can be both on our skin, on our hair, on the walls. The only criteria which we can apply to what is spelled out in these chapters, 12 to 15, are those laid down by our sages of the Midrash and Talmud, etc., all of which date back to the instructions received orally from Moshe Rabbeinu. Right, so what is Rashbam really saying? Look, we're dealing with something that's outside of the realm of human knowledge. In other words, this is a spiritual problem. If the only way that we can address it is by going based on what's in the Midrash and the Talmud, then this is something else. There's something appearing for us that isn't being stirred up in the ways of which we think, right? And we have words for this. We call this psychosomatic, right? When we have things that are going on in our bodies, but then they appear, or I should say in our spirits, and then they appear on our bodies, that's a psychosomatic response, right? Oftentimes those are triggered by stress or what have you, but in this case, there's some real spiritual sickness that's causing an eruption in this home. And we're going to focus on the home for now. So what's the remedy? Let's go back into the text and we'll do a step-by-step. Okay, so first the Kohen comes in and notices, right, that they go deep in the wall. So already the plague, the issue, has some depth, right? So the first thing, close the door for 7 days, right? Maybe we can choke the oxygen out of this, right? Maybe if we just let it be, it'll go away from the outside in, right? Comes back, nope, that didn't work. All right, so maybe we just take it like the pieces out and like perhaps this is a contained issue and we can just remove little parts and not have to deal with the whole foundation, the whole shape of the house, and we'll see if that works, okay? Comes back a week later, that didn't work. All right, well then, we say it is a malignant eruption, right? The whole thing is unclean. And the whole house has to be torn down. Its stones and its timber and all the coating on the house just taken away, right? And we presume a new house has to be built. This is somebody's house. They have to live there, so they have to start all over again. Okay, that's pretty intense. And so here, when I read this, I was thinking about, what's going on in the world. And there, people who are saying, we have to tear down the system, we have to do this. Or there are people who are afraid that other people are saying, we have to tear down the system. It's bad, we have to start again, we can't fix it. And so I read this and I was like, oh my God, this is like what we're talking about, like what's going on now, right? So some people have recognized that, the issues of racism, issues of hate, and it's not even about racism per se. It's like every ism, right? Because they all have their root, the seed being hate. So racism, homophobia, sexism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, right? Like all of these are rooted in that same hate. And we have to figure out, like, it's already deep, right? Like this is not like new for our generation. So it already has depths by the time the Kohen comes in to look at it. By the time we're now starting to look at the problem, we understand that there's depth. So how do we deal with it, right? Maybe we can just close the door. Right? Maybe we can just like ignore it and it'll just go away. We've tried that for a very long time. Did it work? It didn't work. It didn't work for the Kohen. It doesn't work for us. right? Okay, maybe we can just try to like take pieces out, right? Or bring things in, or like do it piecemeal, right? Did it work? It didn't work, right? Okay, maybe we have to tear the whole system down and just like get rid of it. And like that's gonna be the solution. We'll just start again, right? And so I wonder, like, well, wait a minute. Like this tzara'at, it's not, Rashbam already said, like, we can't address this in any of the typical human knowledge ways that we would think to address it, because it's not a typical human knowledge problem, right? So who's to say that the tzara'at would not be then on the land? You think we could tear the system down, tear the house down, and just build a new house, and it's not going to get tzara'at again? No, we have to get to the root, right? The zera, that's the root of tzara'at, of the issue, and work from there. So we have this wonderful quote from the Talmud: everything that the Holy One, blessed be God, does is for the best. What is this talking about? When we look at the beginning of this, it says, when you enter the land of Canaan, that I give you as a possession, and I inflict an eruptive plague on the house that you possess, ... So it doesn't say, right, when you discover that there's a nega, right? It says, God is saying, this is something that I have given you. It's like, wait, what? Why would God inflict this sort of nega on someone's house, on someone's livelihood? And in the same way, when we think about hate, and if we believe that the Shema, which we say, Yomam v'Layla, is true, a day and night, morning and evening, if we believe that it's true, that everything in the world comes from God, everything is a part of God, then the same has to be true of this seed of hate. It has to have some purpose, right? It is included in the God complex, right? So nega also comes from God. The Talmud tells us everything that God does, latova. This is for tov. And through my studies of Kabbalah, I've come to understand that tov doesn't necessarily mean like good, like yay, it's good, but it means that there's a balance. There's a balance, right? That there's what's something may appear as bad for me, but it's good on a larger scale somehow, right? There's something that we're moving to, driving to. I'm actually really grateful that we're getting to discuss this during the week of Tiferet of the Omer, which is all about balance. So what do? First, we have to treat it like something sacred. This is a sacred dilemma that we can't just tear down, because tearing it down and getting rid of it and piecemealing it would be using a human solution to deal with a divine problem, right? And that's not going to work. And Rashbam tells us we can't do that. So when we discover that God has inflicted us with tzara'at, the person, or our house with tzara'at, the person goes and says something like a plague. Kenega nirali babayit, right? Something like a plague has appeared upon my house. And the halacha says that this is the formula that even like a nega specialist, right? Like someone who knows deeply about tzara'at, about negaim, would have to still say this kenega, right? They cannot come at it with a positive. And it's like, why, right? Like, I know what a nega is. I like went to school for a negaim, not me, but like I went to school for negaim. Like, obviously I know what this is, but I'm still being commanded to bring with me this doubt. What is this teaching us? I wonder if this is a good time to move there. Yeah, let's jump into this text. What is this doubt? What's the purpose of it? As we would expect, there are many different approaches as to why this is the case, this idea of kenega. One of the most fascinating is offered by Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, one of Rashi's best-known super commentators. But I have heard from my teachers that this verse is not being precise in its nomenclature in regard to stating something is absolutely, is positive, nega, or doubtfully, ke nega, a ritually pure tahor or impure tameh lesion, right? It's not black and white. It's not crystal clear. Rather, it's addressing a matter of derech eretz, ethical behavior. That is, a person should never declare a lesion to be tameh, even if the matter is crystal clear in their eyes. Instead, they must always state that the lesion is only perhaps tameh, right? We're creating a safek, a doubt, and leave the determination to someone else, to the kohen. Interestingly, we don't have kohanim anymore, right? So it's whatever we say, when we create a safek like this, it'll always be a safek. This is in congruence with Chazal, who say one should always teach his tongue to say, I don't know, right? And like, wow, that is so hard for us to say, because we are human beings and we live in this society that prizes, that values knowledge and values certainty, right? But our tradition is telling us that we should teach our tongue to say, I don't know. So coming here to kanega creates doubt. And with doubt, there comes, I was going to say confusion, but not confusion, but conversation and consideration and asking questions. And that is what our tradition is all about, right? Asking, we don't care about the answers. We care about the questions. You know, we're coming right off of Pesach, right? Like, do we really get into the answers of all the questions that we raised during the Seder? No, we keep the conversation going. So when we say something like a plague has erupted, well, how is it like a plague, right? Like, what does it look like? Where did it come from? Where does it grow? Like, all of the kinds of questions that evolve. And so when I turn my eyes to think about all of the hate and all of the injustice in our world, it does seem clear, right? To say that is clearly hate. That is clearly wrong. Right? But our tradition is saying, no, even if you're an expert, even if you know that's clearly hate, that's clearly wrong, why don't you explore the matter? Right? Because out of the conversation, out of the questions, we get deeper knowledge. Right? So why does that person feel that way? Why does that person think that way? Why is this person responding in this way? Or even asking the question, is this an instance? Is this a nega? Is this hate? Is this anti-Semitism? And like, it doesn't matter if we get to even the same answer. It's about the process of how we got there, right? So at the end of the day, if the Kohen says, yep, that's a nega, right? It's about the process of how that was established. And that it's a communal process, that it involves more than just us circling in our own heads, because that's easy enough to do, right? To read something, to think that's certainly a nega, that's certainly what Shmuley down the block had in his house. So I can tell you that this is definitely a nega. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's something else that you don't know, that the Kohen has more knowledge and more experience with. Okay, so back to this fantastic comment about derech eretz. That is in line with what Rashbam was saying, that this is not an issue of medical something, right? There's something boiling under the surface that has erupted, and now we need to figure out what's going on under the surface. And like, this is what we're experiencing in our society right now, right? Like, this has been going on for so long. All of the hate, anti-Semitism, anti-Asian hate, anti-Black hate, anti-Native hate, right? All of this stuff we've been living with this for so long. It's like the air. We don't even notice it because it's become so normalized. Yet it's there and it's churning. And now we're having all of these eruptions, right? And just like with the nega, it's there, but until there's an eruption, we don't call the Kohen. We don't notice it. We can't acknowledge it. So what a blessing to have an eruption in order to be able to address the tzara'at underneath. Okay. Derech Eretz preceded the giving of the Torah by 26 generations, right? Oh my God. The underlying meaning of this concept was given voice in Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's first earlier aphorism. This is from a Dvar Torah. So there's another one before that. If there is no Torah, there is no derech eretz. If there is no derech eretz, there is no Torah. Right? So like, this is our tradition saying that the whole purpose of Torah later on is to teach us how to live. Torah is by definition related to the world that we are living in, right? If it's not, then what is it doing? Then what's its purpose, right? Derech eretz and relations existed long before Torah did, and Torah came to teach us how to relate in a godly manner, as we will be learning next week with the Holiness Code and Kedoshim. All of those talk about relations between people. They talk about politics. Why? Because Ani Adonai, right? Because I am God. That's why you're going to do this, because you are going to be holy because I am holy, and here's how you do that. So, in other words, even though we're blessed with the Torah, it is in addition to and does not supplant the fundamental obligation to live lives based upon ethically suffused actions. For the Torah itself depends upon derech eretz, depends upon this idea of how we live our lives in the world, how we interact with that which we understand as other, be it the natural world, be it other people of other nationalities or races or genders, what have you. How do we live our lives in response to that? So this idea that the derech eretz existed before the Torah. I'm going to stop sharing because I think that's all we're doing with the text at this moment. Leads us into like, so what, right? So what? What is our purpose? What is like the ultimate goal of this derech eretz? And that's what, I've been thinking about, like how do we deal with the ultimate tzara'at that's going on, that we're plagued with? Is this how do we get out of the problem, right? Like, how do we purify the land so that we can rebuild the home? Or how do we find the best ways to remediate it? And so I've been reading this fantastic book. It's called In Over Our Heads, The Mental Demands of Modern Life by Robert Keegan. And it's for my adult development class. I just watched a YouTube video with him, and he posited this notion that so we're living longer now. Not only are we living longer, but there's a lot more of us, and we're living almost an entire generation longer, right? So it's like, wow, we've got more time to develop as a species. And I kept coming back to Rashbam saying, we can't think about this with the human knowledge that we have now. We can't approach this with what we know now. We need to come at it from a different way. And there's that quote from Einstein, which I've never been able to actually figure out where he said it exactly. It's sort of like, someone saying I heard Einstein say that the thinking that got us into this problem, or the levels of thinking that got us in, aren't going to be the levels of thinking that will get us out. And so when we ask these questions, when we say kenega, something like a nega, when we invite the wondering and the curiosity, it allows our brains, our minds to think and explore. And Keegan presented this like fifth level of consciousness, basically, this new thought. Certainly his fourth level of consciousness, he said, doesn't erupt into our consciousness until middle age. Previously, though, middle age was when humans would die, right? Like our lifespans would be over. But now we've discovered that there's this new way of thinking that happens as you get older. We call it wisdom, call it integration. That's what Erickson did. Erickson but a couple of years ago, maybe like 20 years, like time starts to seem differently as you get older. But Erickson re-released the life stages because as he and his wife were in their 90s, they were like, oh my God, like life looks totally different when you're this old. And let me tell you what that means. So as humans, we're starting to live longer and we're starting to think differently, and we're being gifted, thank God, with this amazing knowledge and the ability, the new thinking that's going to get us out of these old problems. So when we approach the Tzora'at as a gift, as something from the divine, we don't chuck it out and we don't say we're just gonna tear the house down and rebuild it, because that's not addressing the Zera of the Tzora'at, right? The seed of the Tzora'at. We do what is so Jewish of us. We ask questions, we consider, we talk to a friend. And from those conversations, from that interaction, we can develop our thinking. We learn new things, which sometimes like hurt, right? Like it's hard to hear things it's hard to change our self-narratives, or it's hard when our self-narratives develop sometimes, right? What I thought was true is not true. What I lived my life believing was no longer true. For me now, it was true then, right? It doesn't negate how I used to think or how I used to be, but I now think differently. It's just like being an adolescent. Like God, my worldview when I was 13, like everything was a crisis. And now I'm like, so glad I survived that. But that, I don't look down on that. It's just a different iteration of me. So we're growing into different iterations of ourselves as humanity. And that's only possible when we do that by not looking at things as black or white, good or bad, wrong or right, pure or impure. But when we are able to ask the questions, and even when we feel like we're experts in a thing, to say still it's kenega, right? It's something like a nega maybe. So I think that's all I have for us, so that we can have some time to discuss and ask some questions, or for you to share your insights as well.
And for this, feel free to use the chat box, or if you'd like to speak, you can use your virtual hand, or let us know that you want to be unmuted, and we'll go from there.
I'm also going to peruse the chat because I wasn't looking at it. It's distracting. Okay,
I was alerted that someone wanted to be unmuted. Don DeRoss, you had a question or comment? You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. You've mentioned all of these significant areas that challenge us to come up with new ways. I think that's beautiful, but what I see as a problem is how one person or one group can integrate all those realms of knowledge to bring about the change that you seek. It's such a global, complicated problem that individuals may be able to make these kinds of changes in their lives, but in a society, that doesn't seem to be working, according to what I see in the world today, anyhow.
Hear you. Yes. Well, I think what's important to remember is that societies are made up of individuals, right? It's not like a thing that exists. We all bring ourselves to society. So this is all of this work is incumbent on us, both as societies and as individuals, but it has to start with us as individuals. And for this, this is the Torah, right? Like this is the Jewish way in. And I know that, our Christian neighbors down the street, they're looking into their texts and they're saying, oh, this is, this is what Jesus meant when he said blah, 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 blah. And our Muslim neighbors are looking into the Quran and understanding, oh, when the prophet, peace be upon him, said this, you know, this is how we understand this now, right? And like this right here, this Torah of Tzaraat isn't the Torah for everyone, you know, in the world. This is the Torah for those of us who consider ourselves Yisrael, right? To whom Torah is our language and it speaks to us. So I do believe that this is very personal and individual work. And then we show up in our organizations and our families and our organizations and our workplaces and our town meetings, etc., guided by that and doing that sort of work in a secular, worldly, global way.
Yvonne asked in the chat, can you explain the difference in Hebrew between Sarat and Nega? They both seem to mean a plague.
Oh yeah, the Nega is like a thing, like like the eruption. Like you can see the Nega, and the Tzaraat is like I would consider it like the bacteria, right? Like the thing that's causing the issue itself, and it like the whole condition of it. So like you have this is so you have herpes, right? And like it's the thing that you have, and then you have like a herpes. You know, a herpes would be like a nega, and herpes would be a Tzaraat.
Sion?
Hello. Hi, this is Zion from the UK. It may be off topic. I just wanted to know how we can connect with you. I really enjoyed today's session. Do you have any details or where you're teaching anywhere else? How can we make the connection?
Sure. I am here at TBZ, Temple Beth Zion in Brookline, Massachusetts. And you're invited to check out our website. We're in the middle of redoing our website. Or, you know, follow us on Facebook. Like that. That's easy and more up to date. I teach classes. I sort of, you know, bop around. I should get a website. You can follow me on Facebook, Rabbi Tiferet Berenbaum. Yeah, thanks for asking.
All right, I think we got to the end of the questions. Thank you so much. Rabbi Tiferet, did you see something else? Do you want to close up?
Oh no, I was just scanning really quickly the chat to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh man, unfortunately I didn't get a chance to talk about prophets, but prophets are so relevant to this. And you know, prophets being people who are able to see, the visionaries. And since we don't have Kohanim anymore, we don't have a temple, but we do still have prophets. We have people who are looking clearly with eyes. And I would say like that would take the place of the Kohanim. And there are lots of people these days who are in touch with the divine and their divine in that kind of way and can speak to that. So thanks for asking.